I think that's right. And I was going to go straight back to silence, but I had a couple of questions lined up in case we had a break in callers or whatever. And one of them was actually to ask you about Potholer, the school child. I have this image of you in your shorts, running around in the playground and everything. But there were two things I couldn't quite work out in my head. The first was whether you were going to be one of the troublesome children, as I was, whose tie would never be done up and the top button would always be loose. And also, were you top of the class at school? So there's two questions for you. Did you have your tie
I,
and top button done up, and were you top of the class?
I will answer the second one first because I have made no reservations about this. We had a class of 31, and I always competed with another boy to be bottom of the class. I was either 30th or I was 31st. I came out of
I'm not
university
buying that.
with the lowest degree, which was third class. It was an honours degree, but it was third class. It wasn't a particularly good degree. And no, basically, I was not that great. And I always tell people this because I think that was one of the reasons why I was such a, I think, a good science journalist was that I didn't understand half of the things I was covering. If they weren't the subject I studied, which was geology, I would have to learn about these things very quickly, and therefore I would have to explain them in a way that people as dumb as me could understand them. And I would, if I was doing something really complicated, if I had known that subject, I would have written the story in a very complicated way, and very few people would have understood it. But because I was so dumb, I actually had to dumb it right down so that I could understand it, and that meant most of my readers could understand it. So
On
I think
that
that's why.
on that bombshell, the admission
Well,
that Potholer is thick as a brick. um,
well, and let me just answer the other question because
oh, sorry, yes.
I was not by any means the smart kid, tidy, nerdy kid. I was actually the class clown, which I presume you could believe.
I could buy
And
that.
I was constantly imitating my teachers. I was annoying them. I went to school in pink trousers one time just because I knew it would get a rise out of them, and I was sent home again. I once collected
Fight the
lots of
system.
I collected lots of bangers one time just before Guy Fawkes night, and I put them in the roller in the school grounds, tied them all together, and I actually invented this fuse. I did far more interesting science stuff outside of science class. I made this fuse of pipe cleans and white time now. I exploded right in the middle of school time, and it was such a massive explosion it went throughout the entire school. So I was not your good schoolboy, I can tell you that.
I do genuinely hope that it wasn't just me for whom the audio, and unfortunately, it wasn't just for me. Your audio started breaking up just at the point where you said you'd made this interesting fuse. And I have to insist that you tell us that story again because I didn't hear it and people in
It
the
was
chat didn't
Homeland
hear it.
Security scrambling the signals.
Yeah. Everyone else, make sure that your microphones are muted. Let's ask, please, Potholer, to repeat that story from the point where you made this fuse.
I spent more time and science and experimental sort of ingenuity making this fuse to make sure that it burned down at the right time because it was from play school time when we were out in the field, and I put this thing together rather furtively and put it inside the roller and lit the fuse, and half an hour later, surely enough, it burned through and exploded this little bomb that I'd made, and it didn't blow up the roller, of course, but it did make a huge bang that was heard throughout the entire school. So I was not a
Were you found
ideal.
out? And what was your
No,
punishment?
they
No.
never
Wow.
found out who did it, and never found out who did it. The only time I was caught once was when I made an anti-burglary device on my van when I was driving into school, and that was when I was, what, 17, I think. And I was called up before the headmaster because the burglary device I'd made, which was connected to the sliding door and the battery and the horn, had accidentally gone off and frightened an old lady, nearly killing her. And they knew it was my van, so they called, which you weren't supposed to drive to school, so I was in trouble for that too. But I was called up for the headmaster, who told me I was the worst pupil they'd ever had. And I went around, that was a badge of honor. I told all my friends, headmaster says I'm the worst student they've ever had. So I was quite proud of that. But, you know, all of my science was done for evil rather than good in those days.
I will tell you about the bomb I made at a subsequent time, but I'm keen to move on. And before we go back to, I know Silence wants to comment on what's just been said, but I just noticed that Non-Stamp Collector is in the room. And on the promotional video I made, I did ask people if they would like to see Non-Stamp Collector as a panelist on the show, they should thumb up this comment. And it had a lot of thumbs up. But he's still, I don't know, somewhat reluctant to appear. So I insist that everyone watching this message Non-Stamp Collector on his YouTube channel and encourage him to come and join us on the show on a future occasion. Silence, you wanted to come back on a point that Potholer made.
Yeah, it was the question you asked, why so many people are happy to settle for the mundane. They're afraid of, or rather why they reject the scientific perspective when you think it's more interesting. I've just finished reading Denialism by Michael Spector, which if you haven't read it, I do suggest you do read it. It is very good. It basically takes a look at some of the mainstream anti-science movements. But the very last chapter is devoted to that question. And he makes quite a compelling case that in many of these instances, it's basically that because science is growing at an exponential rate, many people are frightened by it because the more that we find out, the more that we realize we don't know, and the more that some people understand, the more that other people realize they don't understand. And I think that it's perhaps that fear of the unknown. He uses the analogy of surfing. He says that some people will be frightened by the crashing waves, and some people will just be happy to let themselves get swept along by it. I think that's quite a good explanation for a lot of these people why they reject the scientific perspective on things.
Having a more intimate relationship with those kinds of people.
Before you go on, Aaron, I'm just going to remove your silence to get the next caller in, but thank you very much indeed.
Aaron, thank you very much.
Yeah, I just want to say that I've had a more intimate relationship with more of these types of people. I mean, I know a lot of them, and it's the people that can talk about football. They can talk about, you know, they can talk about what's on TV, but it doesn't go much beyond that. It's, you know, that there's hunting and fishing or whatever they happen to do that day, or what they're watching on TV, and it's not going to be that interesting, and they don't have a depth beyond that. There are a lot of people that I know with whom I cannot discuss really politics on any kind of an intellectual level. I certainly can't discuss anything in a foreign country. I can't discuss anything in history beyond the 1960s, perhaps. And I don't understand why they are that way, but there's a lot of people for whom there are definite limits that are very much right around their area of personal experience, and it doesn't go beyond that, and they don't care to go beyond that. I mean, I remember showing a lot of the studies that I have to do, and then the things that were very interesting to me that I was studying in school, and other people would come to me and say, how do you stay awake? I mean, how can you pretend to care about that stuff? And this is stuff that fascinates me. So I don't know where they're coming from.
I mean,
does anyone want
I don't know.
Yeah, let's go to you, Pot, and then we'll take Samuel.
An American thing, or in Europe, I think there's a very different perspective on things, and I've often wondered why. And I think it's partly because maybe the people in, you know, the area where you live, Aaron, don't need to know anything more than that. They you know, they live in a very small world. They're not going to go beyond it. These things don't interest them because they don't need to know about them. I think that the Americans who travel and have been to other countries and experienced other cultures tend to come away with more curiosity, perhaps, and they realize there's more out there. Maybe that's it. I don't know why it is. I just feel sometimes there's a perspective in Europe.